Commander Veltar's crystalline exoskeleton caught the harsh tribunal lights, each facet reflecting years of nightmares that haunted his sleep cycles. The once proud warrior of the Kortheni Empire now sat hunched forward, his 6 compound eyes darting nervously around the chamber, filled with representatives from dozens of galactic species. The scars across his chitinous armor told stories of battles fought across star systems. But none had broken him like the humans had. "Honorable Tribunal," Veltar began, his voice box crackling through the universal translator. "I served the Kortheni Empire for 47 standard cycles. I conquered 17 worlds. I commanded fleets that brought entire civilizations to their knees." He paused, mandibles clicking anxiously. But nothing prepared me for what the humans showed me about warfare. The tribunal chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of recording devices. Species from across the galaxy leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear the testimony that had been classified for 3 years since the Korthane-human conflict ended. Veltar's memory cores flickered back to that fateful day when High Command had tasked his battle group with what they called routine expansion protocols. The target was a small mining colony on Kepler-4 for 2b, home to barely 300 human settlers who had arrived just 2 years earlier. Intelligence reports painted them as farmers and miners, families seeking a quiet life among the stars. Classified them as Level 1 resistance potential, Veltar explained to the tribunal. Minimal military capability, no defensive installations, no fleet presence. Just soft-skinned bipeds with primitive chemical projectile weapons. His lower arms gestured dismissively at the memory. Our battle doctrine suggested a standard orbital demonstration would be sufficient for surrender. The settlement's leader was Hyan Wu, a man in his 40s who had spent 15 years as a military engineer before retiring to civilian life. He had brought his wife Nayun, a trauma surgeon, and their son Taemin to build something peaceful, far from Earth's overcrowded cities. The family had invested their life savings in atmospheric processors and mining equipment, dreaming of creating a self-sufficient community. When our long-range sensors first detected the colony, we saw exactly what they wanted us to see, Veltar continued, his voice growing quieter. Agricultural domes, processing facilities, children playing in the hydroponics gardens. It looked like paradise. The Kortheni battle group consisted of 3 heavy cruisers and 12 support vessels. Standard protocol called for a show of force followed by demands for tribute and submission. Most primitive species would immediately recognize the hopelessness of resistance against superior technology and firepower. Veltar remembered watching the tactical displays as his ships entered the system. The human settlement registered no military signatures. Their communication arrays were civilian-grade. Their power output suggested basic industrial operations. Everything about Kepler-4 to be screamed helplessness. "I opened communications personally," Veltar testified. "I wanted to give them the opportunity to surrender with dignity." The human who responded was this Hyan Wu. He appeared calm, almost friendly. He asked for 12 hours to evacuate the children to underground shelters. Requests seemed reasonable. Korthoni military doctrine actually encouraged the preservation of non-combatants when possible. Veltar granted the time extension, confident that the humans would use those hours to prepare their surrender ceremony. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Every piece of industrial equipment in the colony simultaneously went offline for maintenance. Hyan Wu personally supervised teams of workers as they performed what appeared to be routine mechanical operations on their mining gear. "We should have realized something was wrong when their 17-year-old daughter Jihai began climbing the communication tower," Veltar said, his exoskeleton darkening with remembered shame. "Our sensors showed her installing what looked like repair components. Standard maintenance for a growing colony. But Jihai wasn't repairing anything." The teenager had spent the previous year studying Korthani broadcast frequencies from intercepted military communications. She was installing a jamming array powerful enough to blind 3 cruisers simultaneously. When the 12-hour deadline expired, Veltar opened channels to accept the human surrender. Instead of surrender, every mining drill in the colony activated at once. Thermal boring equipment designed to cut through solid rock turned skyward like artillery batteries, or haulers that normally transported minerals became mobile weapons. Platforms bristling with improvised armor plating. The moment I realized we had been deceived, Jihai activated her jamming system. Veltar's voice cracked. 3 of the most advanced warships in the Cordani fleet became blind and deaf in the span of seconds. Our targeting computers failed. Our communication systems went dead. Our navigation sensors showed only static. Hyenwu's voice cut through the electronic chaos on the emergency frequencies. "Commander Veltar of the Korthoni Empire," he said, calmly, "you have 15 minutes to withdraw your forces from this system. After that, we consider you hostile invaders." The absurdity of the situation struck Veltar like a physical blow. 300 human civilians were threatening a battle group capable of sterilizing entire continents. It should have been laughable, but as Veltar watched his tactical displays, he realized that nothing about the situation was funny. The humans had spent 12 precious hours turning their peaceful colony into a fortress of improvised death. The first wave of Korthani drop pods screamed through. Kepler-4 for 2B's atmosphere like falling stars, their heat shields glowing white-hot. Against the dawn sky, Veltar watched from his command cruiser as 48 of his finest assault troops prepared to make what should have been a routine landing operation. Min-Ho, settlement's chief mechanic, had worked through the entire night in the colony's industrial sector. The 50-year-old engineer moved between the massive atmospheric processors with the focused intensity of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. These machines normally scrubbed toxic gases from the planet's air, making it breathable for human lungs. But Minho had spent 15 years maintaining similar equipment on mining asteroids, and he knew their capabilities better than their original designers. Our drop troops landed in what appeared to be the safest zone. Veltar continued his testimony, his compound eyes reflecting the tribunal's harsh lighting. The landing site showed clear atmospheric readings. No toxic gases, no radiation, no biological hazards. The Korthoni soldiers emerged from their pods with standard assault gear, expecting to face civilians armed with mining tools in desperation. Instead, they found themselves breathing air that burned their respiratory systems like acid. Minho had turned the entire landing zone into a chemical weapons testing ground. Pumping concentrated industrial solvents through hidden vents he had installed during the night, 12 of my soldiers died before they could activate their emergency breathing apparatus, Veltar said, his voice hollow with remembered horror. They were elite warriors who had survived battles on gas giant moons and toxic waste worlds. But Minho had created something our equipment wasn't designed to handle. The surviving Korthoni troops pushed deeper into the colony, their armor's filtration systems working overtime to keep them alive. They moved in standard assault formations, expecting to encounter panicked civilians running for shelter. Instead, they found Nayun waiting for them in the medical facility. Hyun, whose wife had converted the colony's hospital into what appeared to be a field medical station. Red Cross symbols marked the building clearly as a non-combatant facility. She wore standard medical scrubs and had her hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender when the first Korthane soldiers kicked down her door. Nayun immediately began treating our wounded, Veltar testified, his mandibles clicking nervously. She spoke basic Korthani phrases: please, help, medicine. She pointed to our soldiers who were suffering from Minho's chemical attack and gestured that she wanted to help them. The human surgeon worked with the skill of someone who had spent years in emergency rooms. She administered oxygen to Korthani soldiers whose breathing systems were failing. She applied neutralizing agents to chemical burns on their exoskeletons. She even used her medical scanner to monitor their vital signs, ensuring they received proper treatment. For 3 hours, Nayun saved Korthon lives while the battle raged around the medical facility. Enemy fire shattered windows and blew holes in walls, but she continued working. When a plasma bolt nearly killed a wounded soldier, she threw herself over his body to protect him from falling debris. 14 of my men owed their lives to this. Human female, Veltar said, his voice breaking with emotion. They trusted her completely. She had earned that trust with her actions. Then Nayun activated the neural disruptor she had hidden inside her medical scanner. The device sent targeted electromagnetic pulses directly into the Corthoni nervous system, causing instant brain death while leaving their bodies completely intact. All 14 soldiers died simultaneously, their faces still showing gratitude for her medical care. Young Taman appeared on the battlefield 30 minutes later, carrying what looked like medical supplies and a clearly marked first aid bag. The 16-year-old walked slowly toward a group of Corthony soldiers, his hands raised high above his head, shouting surrender. "Don't shoot," in their language. The boy looked terrified, Veltar remembered. He was crying, shaking. Everything about his body language suggested complete defeat. My soldiers lowered their weapons and approached to take him prisoner. Taman waited until 6 Courtney warriors surrounded him before he smiled and whispered a single word in Korean: "Goodbye." The plasma charges hidden in his backpack detonated with enough force to leave a crater where they had been standing. The teenager had turned himself into a human bomb, taking 6 elite alien soldiers with him into death. But the most disturbing encounter came when Corthony reinforcements found Saw Young still operating in a makeshift surgical suite she had established. In the colony's community center, the 30-year-old medic was performing complex operations on wounded Corthony soldiers while explosions shook the building around her. Soyoung had been working for 6 hours straight, Veltar testified. She was covered in Corthony blood. Her hands were steady as she removed shrapnel from our warriors' bodies. She even sang quietly while she worked, trying to keep our soldiers calm during surgery. The medic successfully saved 11 Corthony lives that day. She worked with supplies she had salvaged from the destroyed medical facility, while human and alien forces fought desperately outside. Several times Corthony soldiers offered to evacuate her to safety, but she refused to abandon her patients. It wasn't until the battle ended that they discovered the truth. Soyoung had been injecting every soldier she treated with delayed action, toxins that would kill them slowly over the following weeks. The medicine she gave them would keep them alive just long enough to return to their ships and spread the poison to their fellow crew members. The 18-hour battle finally ended. When Corthony reinforcements arrived from orbit, they found the colony in ruins, with fires burning in every sector and bodies scattered across the settlement. Human and alien corpses lay side by side in the twisted wreckage of what had once been a peaceful farming community. Hyenwu sat calmly in the central plaza, surrounded by the bodies of 43 Corthony soldiers. His clothes were torn and bloodied, but he showed no signs of panic or defeat. Instead, he was methodically organizing data tablets that contained detailed recordings of every aspect of the battle. He had been documenting everything, Veltar whispered to the tribunal. Our weapons capabilities, our armor specifications, our tactical formations, our communication frequencies. The entire battle had been an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as a last stand. When the reinforcement commander demanded his surrender, Hyenwu handed over the data tablets without resistance. He had turned his family's destruction into a weapon that would help other human colonies prepare for future Corthony attacks. The news from Kepler 44-b traveled through human space faster than the fastest starships. Within 72 hours, every human colony, every space station, every mining outpost had received the battle recordings that Hyenwu had died to create. The footage showed exactly how 300 civilians had held off a Corthony battle group for 18 hours using nothing but mining equipment and pure determination. The Corthony High Command watched these same recordings with growing alarm. What they had expected to be a simple demonstration of superior firepower had turned into a tactical nightmare that cost them 3 cruisers and over 200 elite soldiers. Emperor Krexenoth himself declared that humanity must be completely eliminated before their infection of madness could spread to other species. 12 battle fleets began mobilizing across Corthony space. Each fleet contained enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. The Empire's greatest military minds developed new strategies specifically designed to counter human unpredictability. They would show no mercy, take no prisoners, and leave no survivors. But humanity was preparing for war in ways that defied every military doctrine in the galaxy. Donghin. had spent 45 years teaching xenobiology at the University of Newell. Busan, at 73, he should have been enjoying retirement with his grandchildren, tending his garden of earth vegetables that somehow thrived in alien soil. When the call came for civilian volunteers to evacuate before the Korthoni Fifth Fleet arrived, Dong Haeon made a different choice. The old professor walked to the colony's spaceport and commandeered a civilian transport ship designed for hauling agricultural supplies. He spent 6 hours alone in the cargo bay, carefully installing antimatter charges he had constructed using principles from his advanced physics textbooks. The elderly man worked with the patience of someone who understood that precision was more important than speed. "We detected the transport vessel on long-range sensors," Veltar testified, his voice heavy with remembered dread. "One small ship approaching our entire fleet. Our tactical computers classified it as a surrender vessel, or perhaps a diplomatic transport." Dong Haeon opened communication channels as his ship approached the massive Korthoni flagship. The old man appeared calm and dignified on the view screen, wearing his best teaching jacket and speaking in the careful, measured tones he had used in lecture halls for decades. "Commander of the Fifth Fleet," Dong Haeon said politely, "I am Professor Dong Haeon of New Busan University. I have a message for your emperor." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Every breath you take in our space costs you blood." The transport ship detonated against the flagship's hull with the force of a small star. The antimatter reaction vaporized both vessels instantly, taking with them 3,000 Korthoni crew members and the Fifth Fleet's most experienced admiral. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from the surface of New Busan. It's 40 million kilometers away. Dong Haeon's final message became humanity's war cry, broadcast on every frequency across human space. Children learned it in schools, workers sang it in factories. Soldiers carved it into their armor before deploying to battle zones. On New Seoul, a world known for its peaceful educational institutions, kindergarten teacher Yansu faced an impossible choice. The 20th-year-old educator had spent 5 years working with children ages 4 to 6, teaching them basic reading and mathematics in a cheerful classroom decorated with pictures of Earth, animals, and cartoon characters. When Korthoni forces began their orbital bombardment of New Seoul, evacuation became impossible. The spaceports were destroyed in the first wave. The communication arrays went dark. Yansu found herself trapped in the school with 19 small children, whose parents had been caught in the city when the attack began. The teacher gathered her students in the basement. Veltar continued his testimony, his exoskeleton reflecting the tribunal's lights. "Our ground forces expected to find terrified children hiding in the dark. Instead, we found something that still haunts my dreams." Yansu had spent 3 days teaching 5-year-olds how to arm demolition charges. She used the same patient, encouraging voice she had always used to teach alphabet letters and counting exercises. The children learned to recognize different types of explosive devices the same way they had learned to identify colors and shapes. When Korthani soldiers entered the school, they found children playing games in the hallways. Little ones who should have been afraid of the terrifying alien invaders instead ran up to them with smiles and laughter. Each child carried what looked like toys or school supplies. A human child named Sungmin, maybe 5 years old, offered to show my soldiers his favorite hiding place. Veltar's voice cracked. He led 6 of my men to a supply closet and activated the charges hidden inside his backpack. The explosion brought down an entire section of the building. The Korthani forces quickly realized they were facing an enemy unlike anything in their military experience. These weren't trained soldiers or desperate civilians, or children who had been taught to see death as another game to play with. Their teacher. But the most disturbing development came when Korthoni forces began taking prisoners. Human captives had always been valuable sources of intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities. Standard interrogation techniques had proven effective against dozens of species across the galaxy. Wu Jin appeared to be perfect prisoner material. The 35-year-old communications officer had been captured during the defense of a mining station in the Proxima system. He seemed frightened and cooperative, eager to provide information in exchange for better treatment. "Wu Jin answered every question we asked," Veltar testified. He gave us detailed maps of human defensive positions. He provided access codes to communication networks, even warned us about booby traps and ambush sites. For 3 days, Corthoni, intelligence officers extracted valuable tactical information from their cooperative prisoner. Wujin ate the food they provided, used the medical care they offered, and even seemed grateful for their relatively humane treatment. On the 4th day, during a routine interrogation session, Wujin bit down on something hidden in his back tooth. The poison capsule killed him instantly, but not before he infected every Corthoni officer in the room with a bioweapon that had been stored in his saliva glands. We discovered that every piece of information he had given us was false, Veltar said, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. The defensive positions were empty. The access codes led to dead networks. The warning about booby traps were actually instructions for setting traps of our own. Interrogation team died slowly over the following week, their nervous systems breaking down as the bioweapons spread through their bodies. Wujin had spent 3 days as a living weapon, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back at his captors. More prisoners arrived with increasingly sophisticated modifications to their bodies. Haijin, a captured engineer, had somehow replaced her entire circulatory system with nanomachines designed to attack Corthoni biology. Simply touching her skin would transfer microscopic robots that would begin eating through alien tissue from the inside out. We stopped taking prisoners after the first dozen incidents, Veltar admitted to the tribunal. Every human we captured became a weapon designed to kill us from within our own detention facilities. The humans had turned their own capture into another form of warfare. They volunteered to be taken prisoner, knowing they would die, but ensuring they would take their enemies with them into death. They weaponized their own deaths, Veltar repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Every captured human became a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. We could not interrogate them. We could not imprison them. We could not even safely kill them without risking our own forces. Corthoni Empire found itself fighting an enemy that operated by rules no military theorist had ever imagined. Every human became a potential weapon. Every act of mercy became a tactical error. Every victory carried the seeds of future defeat. The Crimson Plague was the Corthoni Empire's final solution to the human problem. Developed in secret laboratories deep within their homeworld, the bioweapon was designed to target the specific genetic markers that made humans unique among galaxy species. It would kill quickly, efficiently, and completely, leaving no survivors to continue their terrifying brand of warfare. Emperor Krexanoth himself authorized the deployment after reviewing casualty reports from 17 different battle zones. The humans had cost the Empire more soldiers in 6 months than they had lost in the previous century of galactic expansion. Something had to be done to stop what military analysts were calling the human infection before it spread to other species. The plague was deployed simultaneously across 47 human colonies. Veltar testified, his compound eyes reflecting the harsh tribunal lighting. We calculated that within 30 days, human resistance would cease to exist. The species would be extinct, and the galaxy would return to order. The bioweapon worked exactly as designed. Within hours of deployment, humans began showing symptoms: high fever, respiratory failure, organ shutdown. The plague spread through the air, through water supplies, through any form of contact between infected and healthy individuals. Entire cities went dark as their populations succumbed to the invisible killer. On Earth's moon, Genesio worked frantically in his laboratory as the plague ravaged Luna City around him. The 32-year-old virologist had spent 8 years studying alien pathogens, preparing humanity for exactly this kind of biological warfare. As his colleagues died in the corridors outside his lab, Genesio made the discovery that would change everything. The Crimson Plague was based on modified Corthoni biology. The aliens had used their own genetic material as the foundation for creating a weapon that could target human DNA. But Genesio realized that the biological mechanisms worked both ways. If the plague could be altered to recognize Corthoni genetic markers instead of human ones, it would become humanity's ultimate revenge weapon. Genesio died while transmitting his research to every surviving human colony. Veltar continued his testimony. He broadcast the modification protocols even as the plague consumed his own body. His final transmission lasted 14 hours, during which he methodically explained how to turn our weapon against us. The modification process required infected human subjects as living laboratories. Volunteers lined up at research facilities across human space, knowing they would die, but hoping their deaths could be weaponized against the enemy. Scientists worked around the clock, racing against time as their own species faced extinction. Within 2 weeks, the first modified plague samples were ready for deployment. But the humans faced a critical problem: how to deliver a bioweapon to Corthan. Worlds when their own ships and crews were dying from the original plague. The solution was as horrifying as it was brilliant. Yonji had been a commercial pilot before. The war-flying cargo runs between the outer colonies and the core worlds. When the plague reached her home on New Inchin, she volunteered for what everyone knew would be a one-way mission. The 29-year-old woman had already begun showing symptoms. When she climbed into the pilot's seat of a converted cargo hauler, her ship appeared on our sensors 3 days after she had died, Veltar testified, his voice filled with remembered horror. The vessel was broadcasting standard refugee identification codes. Our traffic control systems cleared it for emergency landing on Corthone Prime. Yunji's corpse had been modified extensively before her death. Hidden transmitters were surgically implanted throughout her body, designed to activate when she reached the enemy homeworld. As her ship descended through the atmosphere, these devices began broadcasting the exact coordinates of every military installation, government facility, and population center on the planet's surface. The dead pilot was delivering targeting data for human revenge strikes that would come later. Her body had become a reconnaissance platform, gathering intelligence even after death. But Yanja's ship carried more than just a dead pilot. The cargo hold contained what appeared to be surviving human refugees from colonies that had been devastated by the plague. Men, women, and children huddled together in the cramped space. Looking like the desperate survivors of a cosmic catastrophe, Kung, Ho, Sun Mi, and Jae-sung were among the refugees who disembarked on Courtney Prime. 2 alien immigration officials? They appeared to be the lucky few who had somehow survived the plague that was killing their species. They spoke broken Corthane, begged for medical assistance, and showed all the symptoms of trauma survivors fleeing from genocide. What the Corthane didn't realize was that these refugees were already dead. It volunteered to be infected with both the original plague and GSCO's modified version. Their bodies were walking biological weapons, programmed to spread the alien targeting variant of the disease while appearing to be harmless victims seeking sanctuary. The refugees were processed through our standard immigration facilities, Veltar explained to the tribunal. They received medical examinations, temporary housing assignments, and even food rations. Our officials wanted to demonstrate Corthone, compassion for the victims of our own bioweapon. Within hours, every alien who had contact with the refugees began showing symptoms of the modified plague. But the disease didn't kill quickly like the human version. Instead, it spread silently through Corthony communities. It's transmitted through casual contact and normal social interactions. The most devastating carrier was 8-year-old Biaram, who had somehow survived the initial plague infection through a combination of genetic immunity and medical intervention. The little girl appeared healthy and cheerful when she arrived with the refugee group. Clutching a bouquet of flowers she had picked from her colony's ruined gardens, she walked into our command center like she belonged there. Veltar's voice became barely audible as he recalled the memory. Biaram was wearing a pretty yellow dress and had ribbons in her hair. She looked like any child from any species across the galaxy. The 8-year-old approached Veltar's second-in-command, General Morkith, and offered him the flowers with a bright smile. She had learned a few words of Corthony from the refugee camp and called him nice alien uncle while giving him an enthusiastic hug. Morkith was charmed by the human child's innocence and courage. He accepted the flowers graciously and even picked her up to show her the view from the command center's observation deck. For 10 minutes, the battle-hardened general played with a human child while his staff watched and smiled at the heartwarming scene. 3 days later, Morkith's nervous system began to liquefy from the inside out. The modified plague that Bioram carried in her saliva and skin oils had been specifically designed to attack Corthoni neural pathways. The general died in screaming agony while his brain dissolved into toxic sludge. But the worst revelation came. When Corthony medical facilities began treating their own plague victims, Inho, a human doctor who had allegedly been captured during the battle for New Tokyo, volunteered to help treat the growing number of sick aliens he claimed to have developed, treatments that could slow the disease's progression. Inho worked tirelessly in our medical facilities, Veltar testified. He treated hundreds of Corthoni patients with medicines he claimed could fight the plague. Our doctors were grateful for his expertise with human-derived pathogens. What they didn't realize was that Inho's treatments were actually accelerating the disease. The human doctor was injecting Corthoni patients with concentrated doses of the modified plague, ensuring they would die faster while appearing to receive the best possible medical care. The 38-year-old physician had volunteered for the mission, knowing he would die from the original plague within days. He spent his final week of life moving between Courtney hospitals, systematically poisoning every patient he treated while maintaining the appearance of a dedicated healer trying to save lives. We realized that the humans had turned their own extinction into our destruction. Veltar concluded this section of his testimony. They were dying by the millions, but they were taking us with them. Every refugee ship, every survivor, every act of mercy on our part became another vector for their revenge. The Corthani Empire found itself fighting a war against an enemy that had weaponized death itself. The humans were losing their species, but they were ensuring that their killers would not survive to celebrate victory. The plague that was supposed to end the war had instead transformed it into a mutual extinction event, with both species racing toward annihilation while locked in a death spiral that neither side could escape. The war that had consumed 2 species for 8 months ended in the most unlikely place imaginable, a neutral space station orbiting a dead star in unclaimed territory. The Corthane Empire, facing extinction from their own bioweapon, turned against them, had requested peace negotiations through intermediary species who were terrified of becoming involved in the conflict. Veltar watched from his command ship as the human delegation's vessel approached the station. The craft was nothing like the sleek diplomatic ships used by other galactic civilizations. Instead, the humans arrived in a converted mining hauler that still bore scorch marks from recent battles. Even their choice of transportation was a message. We are not diplomats. We are survivors. Seo Kejin emerged from the human ship carrying a simple wooden box that looked completely out of place in the high-tech docking bay. The 45-year-old human wore no ceremonial robes or military uniforms. He dressed in the practical work clothes of a colony administrator, with dirt still under his fingernails and radiation burns visible on his hands. The human delegation consisted of 3 individuals. Veltar testified to the tribunal, his voice shaking with remembered trauma. No guards, no advisors, no military escort. Just 3 humans who looked like they had walked straight from a battlefield into a peace conference. When the negotiations began in the station's central conference room, Seok Jin placed his wooden box on the table between the 2 delegations. The Cortheni diplomats assumed it contained documents, cultural gifts, or perhaps recording devices. Instead, Seo Chin opened the box to reveal the perfectly preserved organs of Fleet Admiral Mortax, Veltar's commanding officer, floating in clear formaldehyde solution. Admiral Mortax had been captured 3 weeks earlier during the battle. For the Centauri shipyards, Veltar continued, his compound eyes reflecting the tribunal's harsh lighting. We had assumed he died when his flagship was destroyed. Never knew the humans had taken him alive. Seok Jin explained in matter-of-fact tones that they had harvested Mortax's organs. While he was still conscious and aware, the process had taken several hours, during which the Admiral had remained alive to experience every cut, every extraction, every moment of systematic dismantlement. The humans had recorded everything and offered to share the recordings with the Corthoni delegation. They wanted us to understand the level of commitment they brought to warfare, Veltar testified, his entire exoskeleton shaking with the memory. This wasn't rage or revenge. It was a calculated demonstration of their willingness to exceed any boundary we might think existed. The second human negotiator, Dayun, spread a document across the conference table that made several Korthani diplomats physically recoil. The treaty terms had been written in Korthani blood on carefully prepared human skin. The parchment had been created from the hide of colonists who had died in the plague, while the ink came from Korthani soldiers who had been captured and systematically drained. The treaty was simple, Veltar explained to the tribunal. Complete. Withdrawal of all Korthani forces from human space. Formal recognition of human territorial claims, and a guarantee of non-interference in human affairs. In exchange, they would consider not pursuing total species warfare against our homeworlds. Presented the terms with the calm professionalism of a corporate lawyer discussing a business contract. She explained that humanity had developed 17 different extinction-level scenarios for eliminating the Korthane species, ranging from bioweapons that would sterilize their breeding populations to nanomachines that would consume their planet's atmosphere. But the most terrifying element of the entire negotiation was the presence of 12-year-old Minesio, who stood quietly beside the human negotiators throughout the proceedings. The child appeared perfectly normal, a girl with bright eyes and a curious expression, who occasionally whispered questions to the adults around her. She had been modified, Veltar explained to the tribunal, his voice dropping too barely above a whisper. Minesio's immune system had been engineered to produce airborne toxins lethal to Korthane physiology. Every breath she exhaled contained microscopic weapons designed to kill our species. The child was a walking weapon of mass destruction who looked like someone's beloved granddaughter. She had volunteered for the modifications after losing her parents in the plague, knowing that the process would eventually kill her, but hoping to serve her species one final time. Minesio asked if she could pet one of our diplomats, Veltar continued. She said we looked like the crystal cats from her picture books. The innocence in her voice was genuine, but we all knew that touching her would mean death within hours. Final human representative Sung-hoon delivered the closing statement that would haunt Veltar's dreams for the rest of his life. The 50-year-old former teacher spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had seen civilization collapse and helped rebuild it from ashes. We have shown you mercy by allowing this negotiation, Sang-hoon said, his eyes meeting each Korthani. Delegate in turn. Do not mistake our restraint for weakness. We are prepared to commit acts that would make our ancestors weep, if it means our children can sleep safely. He gestured toward Minesio, who smiled and waved at the alien diplomats. With the cheerful innocence of a child who didn't fully understand the horror she represented, we have already crossed lines that other species consider sacred, Sang-hoon continued. We have weaponized our children, our elderly, our dying, and our dead. If you force us to continue this war, we will cross lines that haven't even been imagined yet. The peace treaty was signed within hours. The Korthani Empire agreed to complete withdrawal from human space and formal recognition of humanity as a sovereign power. In exchange, the humans agreed to limit their expansion to previously claimed territories and to refrain from developing certain categories of bioweapons. But everyone in the room understood that the treaty was less about peace and more about mutual survival. Both species had pushed each other to the brink of extinction, and neither could afford to continue the conflict. Veltar concluded his testimony with a warning to the Galactic Tribunal that echoed through the chamber long after his words had ended. Humanity must be classified as a forbidden zone, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Not because they cannot be defeated, but because defeating them requires becoming something so monstrous that victory itself becomes meaningless. They do not simply fight wars, they become war itself. The tribunal chamber fell completely silent as Veltar finished speaking. Representatives from dozens of species sat motionless, processing the implications of what they had heard. In the years since the Korthoni War, 17 different civilizations had attempted to test human resolve through various forms of aggression. None had survived to file reports. Humanity remained in their corner of the galaxy, quietly building their colonies and raising their children, They maintained peaceful trade relationships with species that respected their boundaries and offered humanitarian aid to civilizations facing natural disasters, but every species in known space understood the truth that Veltar had tried to convey. Some victories cost more than defeat, and some enemies were too terrible to conquer. The humans had proven that survival could become an art form more deadly than any weapon, and that a species willing to sacrifice everything could make even victory taste like ash. The end.